3. Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about Apache ZooKeeper. So last week I came across Apache ZooKeeper and I didn't quite realize what it's used for or why you would use it over certain alternatives. So in this video I'm just going to go through some examples and a really simple high-level architectural diagram of a use case of using Apache ZooKeeper. So I guess the first thing that you might be thinking of if you've heard of ZooKeeper or you're thinking about using it is to know what exactly is ZooKeeper. So this is just a definition that I've created myself. So if someone was to ask me, I'd say ZooKeeper allows us to store application, state or information in a centralized place for distributed systems. So just to dig into that a little bit deeper, what exactly does that mean? So when we say application state, this information can be anything that you can think of, but most likely it's things like passwords, URLs, but it can be any information you want. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this information is usually config information, so it's not just general big bulky data. If you want to have and store big amounts of data, that's what a database is used for. So ZooKeeper is not a database, or it's not a solution to a database for most cases. It's only mainly for config data. So just to maybe give a little bit of a diagram to see how this actually works, we're going to take this example. So this example is we have a client. So our client could be a web browser, but it could be anything you want. And this web browser is interacting with a web application. So we can see just in this example here, this could be a Java or Kotlin application or Scala that uses Spring Boot. And then that in turn calls a service. So there's going to be a service class somewhere within our web application. And within that service class, it's making an update to the database. And the database that we used here is Postgres SQL. Now you can take any of these examples and replace them with whatever you're more familiar with. So it doesn't have to be Postgres, it could be MySQL, could be Redis, could be Cassandra, could be whatever you want. And we have a service class, but if that's confusing you can forget about the service class and just picture your web application communicating with some type of database. So that's okay. So you could imagine that you're storing your URL for your Postgres SQL somewhere within your web application. So maybe you have a config file somewhere within your web application that points to a certain IP address or a certain host name on a certain port, and that's fine. Now the problem would occur if you wanted to go and change that address. Let's say maybe you're going to move to a different database, or that server's gone down and you need to now change the URL. You'd have to go into your config file, change it from there, reboot up your Spring application or whatever web server you're using, and then everything would be fine. But what if you have multiple web applications? So that's the idea of a distributed system. So your application is distributed over many machines. So what does this mean? This means you'd still have the same config file within your Spring Boot application, let's say, but now if there's a change to the Postgres or the database URL, you now need to go into this web server and change it manually, and then you need to go into your second web server and change it manually. And you can imagine that in a big, large distributed system, you're not going to just have two applications. You could have, many applications. So it wouldn't really be that practical to do these type of commands ad hoc. So that's where you would bring in Apache ZooKeeper. So you'd have the same setup. You have your client, which talks to your web app, which has a service, and then it calls Postgres to do maybe it's going to just insert a row, or maybe it's going to delete a row or update a row. But the main thing is the Spring Boot application has access to ZooKeeper, and it knows that the database that we need to go and make those updates to is this database. So it's the IP address 89.22.45.2, and it's run on port 5431. Now this could be anything, could be whatever IP address you have, or it could be a host name, which would actually be better. But let's say you wanted to go and change this to something else because maybe that instance of the database has gone down. All you do is go in and change it here, and then it would be updated on these two applications in this example. But if you had 50 applications, it would be updated on all of them because it's all reading from the one centralized place, and that's what Apache ZooKeeper can do for us. So you wouldn't just have things like database IP addresses and stuff like that. You could also have passwords that you would store in there as well, and there might be any other type of config data you would imagine, but you're mainly thinking about key value pairs. Now, it doesn't have to be key value pairs. I hope you've learned a little bit more about Apache ZooKeeper today, along with some of the examples that I've used. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.